Mr. Chairman, we're live.
We'll call the meeting to order. This is your corporations, elections, and political subdivisions meeting. Just some housekeeping at the top. Remember decorum. We kind of had that Monday and Wednesday speech to kind of be respectful of each other, speak through the chair, and things will go much smoother. Thank you. I did want to comment too, there are times when this is a noon recess meeting, and our members do need to eat. So please don't be offended if you are presenting or if you're up at the dais that somebody's taking a bite. They have to eat, and we've got a long afternoon ahead of us. So I just want to make sure that you know we're not disrespecting you. Okay. So the first bill up for today.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, roll call, yes. Please take roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Brown.
Present.
Representative Locke.
Present.
Representative Heft. Here. Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Lucas.
Present.
Representative Webb.
Here.
Representative Weber.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Chairman Knapp.
Here.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The first bill up today is House Bill 133, Sanctuary Cities, Counties, and State Prohibition. Welcome, Representative. Thank you for coming back. Please identify yourself and we'll start with your bill.
Yes, I'm Joel Guggenmoss.
Is your mic on?
It's green.
Okay,
Am I
if
coming
you
through?
could, yeah, just pull it up to you there.
Representative Joel Guggenmoss here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. It's a pleasure to be here and present this bill to you all. This bill ensures uniform enforcement of federal immigration laws across Wyoming by prohibiting sanctuary policies at the state and local levels. It promotes cooperation between local governments, state employees, and federal authorities to safeguard public safety and uphold the rule of law. By penalizing noncompliance and restricting the misuse of public funds for sanctuary purposes, the bill prioritizes accountability and transparency. Its swift implementation will strengthen Wyoming's commitment to secure and lawful governance. And with that, I'll walk you through the bill. On page 1, lines 1 through 7, it's a brief description of the bill. And section 1 is creating 2 new statutes. And when we move to page 2, lines 3 through page 3, line 23, it's establishing the definitions. Page 4, subsection A, lines 5 through 18, gets into the meat of the bill on what is prohibited as it pertains to the governing bodies of cities, towns, and counties. And page 4, subsection B, lines 20 through page 5, line 18, gets into the penalties of cities, towns, and counties violating subsection A. Page 5, subsection C, line 20 through page 6, line 2, goes into protecting state employees from being hindered from carrying out their official duties of communicating or cooperating with federal officials or law enforcement officers with regard to reporting immigration status information. And page 6, subsection E, lines 7 through 15, goes into the penalties of local officials or employees who refuse to communicate or cooperate with federal officials or law enforcement officers. On section 2, on page 6 through page 7, amends 2 Wyoming statutes, 22-24-301 and 22-24-401 to add specific language to reference this bill. Page 8, section 3 provides for an immediate effective date. With that, I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions from committee? Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative. I'm curious because I don't think we have any sanctuary cities, counties, or state in Wyoming. So I'm curious, and I don't see it ever happening. So I'm curious what the intent of the bill is. Do you think the state is going to change in some way where we're going to start having these?
Representative?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you. We don't have them now, but it's always good to do preemptive measures to prevent it from becoming a problem. As I look at other states, this is becoming a problem. We have a neighboring state actually that is going through this. And because of that, it's actually, I've seen it actually spilling over, the problem and the effects of the problem are spilling over into our state currently. So I'm just trying to take preemptive measures to keep this from becoming a big issue in Wyoming.
Follow up? Okay. Any other questions? All right, got off easy. Okay, next we'll have our Secretary of State. If you'd come up, introduce yourself for everybody.
Well, thank you. I'm Wyoming Secretary of State Chuck Gray, and I want to express my complete support for House Bill 133 to ban sanctuary cities and counties in Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, for years, House members have tried to pass this bill. We brought it in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. Every single time it actually hit the floor 3 of the 4 years, and every single time it failed. And we heard that, oh, this is not happening here, and there's no problem. And then we get this over December and late November, this very disturbing story about the lack of communication in Teton County with ICE and the fact that they were they were conducting those releases in potentially not the appropriate time period. So I think it is very important that we get this done. And I think that it will be a tool in the toolkit for ensuring that we have compliance with the law in Wyoming, because I really am concerned, and I don't buy this line that this will never happen. I mean, we have to be vigilant, and I think this bill is a great vehicle to do it. Now, the one suggestion I have is to add a civil cause of action in here. And, you know, Representative Gugamas, he used similar to what we brought in earlier. He made some great changes, but this is one thing that didn't quite get in there. And I think a civil cause of action is an important addition. I don't have suggested language, but I'm concerned that the prosecutors aren't going to, I'm concerned that there might not be compliance over there in enforcement. They have a lot of work, a lot of the prosecutors and the AG, and I think that I'm just concerned that might not happen. And so I think having that civil cause of action is very important. I also think it's very important to make it clear that any sanctuary city or county will not receive any state funds. So that's how you nip it in the bud, because of course it's already illegal federally, but you tug at the purse strings, that's how you stop it. Thank you. I'm very in support of this bill, House Bill 133.
All right, questions? Representative Lucas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Always good to see you, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Could you please just tell us in a brief way what a civil cause of action is?
Yes, thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas. It would allow an individual to bring an enforcement action in court, a citizen, and would provide for standing in that matter rather than solely relying on prosecutors or the AG.
Follow up? Okay. Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Secretary, so I'm interested in whether you are testifying as a private citizen or is this the position of your office, and what does this have to do with the Secretary of State's office?
Secretary Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary of State is laid out in the Constitution as the number 2 statewide official in the state of Wyoming. And so I feel that the attacks that the media has provided, that I can't testify on policy matters, is pretty absurd. So I'm testifying in my official behalf, on my official capacity as the Wyoming Secretary of State. And we're statewide electeds. We have the ability to involve ourselves in policy.
Follow up?
Thank you.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I have a question. You referenced something that had happened in Teton County. If this bill was implemented, would that stop them from doing what you had referenced?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, that is a matter of some debate. I think Teton County feels that they would be in compliance with this statute. I don't agree with them on that. I don't think, in my reading of it. But that's why I think the civil cause of action is important.
Thank you. Follow up? Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Now ask for any other agency or lawmaker in the room. Any representatives? Okay, we'll go to public testimony. Anybody here for this bill from the public, for or against? Thank you, sir. Good to see you again. Please introduce yourself for the public.
Good afternoon. My name is Antonio Serrano. I'm the Advocacy Director for the ACLU Wyoming, and we are here to oppose House Bill 133. First thing I want to say is the Teton County Sheriff did what he's supposed to do. He followed the law. And I understand immigration law is very complicated. Not everybody can follow it or understand it. But the law is 48 hours without a warrant or an order from a judge. He did not hold people because he didn't have that order from a judge, and from what I understand, you're supposed to follow the law, and which is exactly what he did. Also, the people that were released were not violent criminals. They're not what people are trying to make them out to be. From what I understand, from having conversations with people in community, these are people who did not have a license. That's it. So there's a lot more context to the story than what's being portrayed. So I was born and raised here in Wyoming. My father is an immigrant, so I've been living and working with immigrants of all statuses most of my life. I've been an immigrant advocate here in Wyoming since 2017, and I've worked with immigrant families and individuals here in Cheyenne, Laramie, Casper, Evanston, Rock Springs, Gillette, and Jackson. I work very closely with immigrant families, faith leaders, business owners, and immigrant advocates all over the state, and I can say with 100% certainty, there are no sanctuary cities, there are no sanctuary counties, there are no nonprofits or advocacy groups organizing to become a sanctuary. There are no county or elected officials having discussions to become sanctuary cities or counties. This is not happening in Wyoming. I have spent years working with immigrant families and individuals that are keeping our state going, learning how bills like this impact them. And I spent a lot of time having conversations with people, learning how bills like this are received in those communities. You can trust me when I say that you are sending a message to immigrants that they are not welcome here in Wyoming. This message is enforced with the way this bill forces law enforcement to work with federal agents. This erodes trust with immigrants the immigrants have in local law enforcement, which is something I believe that nobody wants. When people say this bill will not impact families in Wyoming, they're wrong. It's estimated that 1 in every 15 U.S. residents is part of a mixed status family, or some 22 million people. According to the U.S. Immigration Council, we have 10,000 U.S.-born citizens living with at least one immigrant parent. That is a lot of potential Wyoming voters who are watching what you are doing and how you're talking about the people that they love. The distrust that this bill creates between immigrants and local law enforcement will also cause undocumented and mixed status families to be less likely to report crimes or cooperate with investigations. This is not something that we can afford. I'm sure the committee wants everyone in our community to trust law enforcement, but this bill makes that harder. Our immigration system is broken. Congress must find a way to pass positive, comprehensive immigration reform. But in the meantime, forcing our communities to devote scarce local resources to breaking up families is not the answer. Wyoming used to believe that local governments should not have their rights taken away on how to make decisions about how to use taxpayer money to protect their citizens. This bill is opposed to that idea. If you want to keep families safe and communities safe in Wyoming, do not pass a bill that forces people farther into the shadows. So I ask you, please vote no on House Bill 133. Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Vice Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And question for you, what impact do you believe this has on legal immigrants?
As I said, 1 in about 15 folks are in a mixed status family. So that means you have families here who have some undocumented parents, who have children who are citizens. It's going to cause people to leave Wyoming, leave the workforce, which is a problem that we need in Wyoming.
Mr. Sedano, through the chair.
My apologies.
Okay. Any other questions? Follow up?
So the impact is because of the mixed families, because there are those that are illegal in the mix. Is that what you're saying?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Sedano.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, yes, there are undocumented. I'm not a fan of calling human beings illegal. It's a very dangerous road to go down, but there are, yes, mixed status families here.
Follow up? Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
Is there anybody else from the public? Commissioner Ford, good to see you. If you can identify yourself for the committee, for the public.
Mr. Chairman, Jim Ford, member of the Campbell County Commission, here today speaking on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association.
Thank you. You may proceed with any statement or.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The position of the County Commissioners Association is to oppose this bill as presented. And I do want to begin by clearly stating that it's our understanding that no county commission has ever or ever intends to establish a sanctuary county policy. We do express our appreciation that this version of the bill, unlike previous versions, as we understand it, prohibits the state from implementing the policy. And while we are generally protective of local governance, we do appreciate and we don't oppose the sentiment expressed through House Bill 133. We do, however, take offense that the penalty provisions appear to be unnecessarily harsh and focused only on local governments. And we would suggest that to address our concerns, we'd request the committee consider making these specific changes. First, to delete provision B, starting on page 4, line 20, and delete provision E, starting on page 6, line 7. Of note, these provisions don't address anything about the state or its employees, and we believe it's unnecessary for local compliance. We feel that this legislation need only address the subject policy. And just want to close again by saying no county commission ever intends to or has established a county sanctuary policy. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Could you do me a favor and just go through those revisions one more time?
Sir, yes, Mr. Chairman. First, deletion of provision beginning at B, beginning page 4, line 20. And secondly, to delete provision E, beginning on page 6, line 7.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Chairman,
Are there any
thank you.
questions? Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Commissioner, so we heard from the secretary that he was pushing for a private right of action. Do you think that would create a burden on counties if they were unduly accused?
Mr.
Commissioner?
Chairman, Representative Yin, I'm not prepared to comment on that. I'm just unfamiliar with that provision, so respectively, I'll not offer any answer.
Thank you. Follow up? Any other questions? Representative Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. My question is, in any of your committee commissioner meetings, has anybody from the public come up and said, hey, are you guys thinking about what could happen with so many people coming across the border and they could come here? How are we going to be protected?
Commissioner Ford?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, I can say with confidence that in Campbell County specifically, and within our work in the Commissioners Association, we have had no inquiries or concerns expressed from the public on this topic.
Follow up?
No, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ford. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Exie Brown. I'm a citizen here in Cheyenne. And this summer, when I was out canvassing and campaigning through my district, anytime this issue was brought up with people I was talking to, they do not want sanctuary cities and sanctuary counties in the state of Wyoming. They do see that it is currently not a problem. However, they don't want it to become a problem. And as you know, with a problem, you never know it's a problem until it does become one. And I agree with the good representative who brought forth this bill that we need to be proactive, not reactive. It's always better to get ahead of it than fall behind and try and play catch up. So I say we put this bill forward. I strongly support this. Illegal immigrants, aliens, unauthorized immigrants, however the term you want to use, when they infest into a city or a county, they are a drain on those counties and cities' economies. They are a drain on the public services that are provided for legal citizens, which is the term used in the U.S. Constitution, legal citizen. If they are not a legal citizen and they came to this country illegally, they have violated law and are therefore a criminal. Sanctuary counties and cities, they are aiding and abetting criminals and illegal people who have come into this country illegally. So I urge an aye vote on this. I fully support it, and I know the constituents in my House districts will support this. I'll
Thank
stand by for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No? Thank you for your testimony. Oh, did you have one? Okay. Thank you. If you could state your name for the recording.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Coulter Felton. Today I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. Director Thompson asked me to step in as he had a prior engagement. His faith in me was one that he wrote down exactly what he would like me to read to you today. So I will go ahead and start with that. It is in regard to a proposed change to the bill as it reads. Starting on page 6, line 7, there's a felony component for supervisory employees that refuse or fail to cooperate. The language gives deference to low-level employers, many of which are not empowered to make such decisions and lack the training to answer immigration inquiries. However, it does not preempt any police officer. We simply ask that if all other employees responsible for this potential crime are limited to experienced persons in leadership, we ask for the same consideration for rookie police officers. With that in mind, we recommend language that moves peace officers to the managerial section, so it would read as follows. Local official or employee means any elected or appointed official, supervisor or managerial employee or peace officer, contractor or agent acting on behalf of or in conjunction with a city, town, or county. That's all I have, sir.
All right. And if you do have that in writing, if we do end up using that, if you could give that to Matt, please. Okay, questions for Mr. Felt? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else in the room for the public or organizations? Matt, do we have anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, we do have one attendee. I'll promote them to a panelist. I'm not sure whether she wants to testify on this bill or one of the later ones, but I want to give her that opportunity.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and move her back to an attendee status. She had indicated specifically that she was most interested in House Bill 116.
Okay, thank you, Matt. All right. At that point, I will close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we move the bill.
Second? Okay. It's been motioned by Representative Brown, second by Representative Weber. Are there any amendments? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not exactly sure the exact language, but given that they gave it to LSO, I'll move the amended language that the Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police Association gave to us.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded for the amendment handed in by Officer Felton. Matt, can you read that
Yeah.
for the committee, just so we have a little refresher on where that's at?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this would appear on page 3, starting on line 7, Romanet 5. It would read, local official or employee means any elected or appointed official, supervisor or managerial employee or peace officer, contractor or agent acting on behalf of or in conjunction with a city, town, or county.
Okay,
So in essence, Mr. Chairman, it moves the term peace officer just immediately after managerial employee, and then removes it from the subsequent portion of the sentence where it starts with or agent.
okay. Are there any discussion on the amendment? No? So again, we're on line 12. We're putting in peace officer just after employee and removing it subsequently from after agent, correct, Matt?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. Everybody got that? All right, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, no. That amendment does carry. Any other amendments? Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, would it, and I'm just inquiring and then going on, would it be appropriate to get with the Secretary of State's office and ask the Secretary of State about his civil penalty and make that as an amendment?
Thank you. Did he go?
Yes, he did.
I think that can be done on the floor. We'll work with the bill as it is now. If there's an amendment that you'd like to do at committee of the whole, we'll work with that, so. All right, are there any other amendments? All right, seeing none. We have before us House Bill 133 as amended. Matt, please pull the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call vote on House Bill 133, Sanctuary Cities, Counties, and State Prohibition. Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Locke.
Aye.
Representative Heft.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Webb.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Representative Yin.
No.
Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 8 ayes, 1 no.
Okay. House Bill HB 133, Sanctuary Cities, Counties, and State Prohibition does pass the committee. Thank you, Representative. Okay, the second bill we have up is House Bill 169, Voter Identification Revisions. And, oh, I'm sorry, HB 160, Voter Identification Revisions, and is Representative Tarver here? Vice Chairman Locke, you are on this bill as a co-sponsor. Would you like to present the bill?
There you go.
If we're going to tackle Representative Tarver later, we're got to do it together, so.
That's right, we need to gang up for that one.
Please proceed and identify yourself, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Tony Locke, House District 35, and obviously a very simple little bill. And what it is doing is it is literally, it's related to, it's repealing the school identification cards as acceptable forms of identification for persons, for voter identification purposes and providing for an effective date. But this is very simple. It just removes those school identification cards, and this has been talked about repeatedly for the last several years where, you know, those cards, we have students from a very broad range. It gets even more complicated when you talk about students from Russia living in the dorms. That might be the extreme case, of course, but people from all over the country and those kinds of things living in the dorms and using these identifications gets a bit complicated and is probably not appropriate. And I know that we're putting much more appropriate IDs in place that people who choose to vote can get, and making it more appropriate. And so this literally just repeals those student IDs.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Is there any questions? Questions from the committee? Thank you. Secretary Gray? Any comments on this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and I'd like to stand in complete and total support for House Bill 160. Voter ID is near and dear to my heart, was the lead on House Bill 75 in 2021. And, you know, what happened is it is a sausage-making process. And as that bill went through, there were a few things that were added to the acceptable list, because we put in statute the IDs that would be allowed for purposes of voter ID in state law. There were some things that maybe were not the best in the long run. And so I think what we're trying to do, and I'm totally in support of it, is trying to clean up the voter ID statute now that we've run it in 2 election cycles, 4 elections total, 2 election cycles, and remove some of the IDs that probably are not appropriate for purposes of voter ID. First, I want to bring in some of our other discussions we have had with the Wyoming Department of Transportation, Driver Services concerning driver's licenses issued by WYDOT and from other states, and the security features on those credentials as opposed to the student ID. As an example, each credential issued by WYDOT to a non-citizen who is a legal resident in the state contains an NR designation, and hopefully that'll be strengthened with the bill that's coming through the Senate. Student ID cards may be issued to non-citizens attending the institutions of higher learning or a Wyoming public school in our state. But to my knowledge, they are not required by law to contain any indication, which is a needed safeguard for preventing non-citizens from voting in Wyoming. And that's really the problem here. There's no statutory or any process sort of safeguards on these other than the policies that the institutions put in place, which can always change. And so in terms of having a photo on these IDs, I know the UW card does have a photo, but in terms of non-citizen designations, we don't have the guarantees, that process in place that many of the other IDs have. There are also concerns when comparing student ID cards to other credentials, such as government-issued driver's licenses, which contain many security features. Unlike other forms of identification for voting, such as a Wyoming driver's license, a Wyoming ID card, a passport, a student ID does not have many of the advanced security features found in these other government-issued IDs, making them more susceptible to tampering and counterfeiting. For many of these reasons, the TSA accepts various forms of identification, including state-issued driver's licenses, U.S. passports, and more, but they do not accept student IDs, highlighting the insufficiency in meeting federal security standards. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to raise some concerns about accepting as a form of voter ID, a student ID, specifically from UW, given some recent concerns that I've become aware of. In the weeks leading up to the 2024 primary election on August 20th, the University of Wyoming Department of Service, Leadership, and Community Engagement held an event titled Donut Forget to Vote, sponsoring rides to the polls from Simpsons Plaza in Laramie. The advertisement specifically stated, as a UW student, you are eligible to vote in Albany County if you choose to, as long as you have a local mailing address. Mr. Chairman, I don't need to remind you this is not the law. In order to vote in Wyoming, Wyoming law requires many things, including that you be a United States citizen, as well as requiring that you be a bona fide resident of the state of Wyoming. This inaccurate recitation of the law in a voter drive of this magnitude raises many questions about credentialing of these IDs and credentialing as a whole. And I think this raises many concerns, that specific post that was made, and I'm in complete and total support of this bill. Thank you.
Okay, do not go anywhere.
Yes.
Do we have any questions for the secretary? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Secretary, so, Mr. Secretary, as you well know, both the university and every single community college in the state are arms of the state. So they are government-issued IDs. They're issued by the government because they are all part of state government. So my question to you is, why are you saying that these government-issued IDs are not okay? If you want those designations changed, if you want those security features in the IDs, why not argue to put them in the IDs? Why take away the ability for those IDs to be used? Because they are government-issued IDs, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Gray.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, that's an interesting bill. I would be, maybe we can talk about that if you're interested in bringing that bill, putting some guidelines on them. I think, though, that it's simpler to just require other IDs for purposes of voter IDs, so I support this bill.
Follow up.
So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, because the focus is it's just removing this type of ID that only impacts students in the state of Wyoming, it does feel like you are disenfranchising students instead of actually focusing on the security aspect that you're worried about. Even though this isn't for proof of citizenship or proof of residency, this is only proof of identity. If you want to work on that security aspect, we could do it. But if you're only focusing on removing their ability to use the ID, it sounds like you're disenfranchising students.
Well,
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, I reject that notion, Representative Yin, that it's disenfranchising because the students can achieve a Wyoming ID, and that was put into the voter ID bill that for purposes of voter registration, you can receive that ID for free. And you go to YDOT, that's on the form. And so I think that, I don't think anyone's being disenfranchised here. I think that we're trying to get security around these IDs, but certainly we've got a week and a half till the bill drafting deadline, I think. So if you want to come by my office and start talking about that bill, I'm happy to brainstorm with you on that
Thank
as
you.
well. But this is the bill in front of us, and I think that, you know, I'm in support of it.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm looking at a form or paper that was given to us here. I'm looking for them to receive an ID. They have to show a driver's license, a passport, a state-issued ID or a military ID card. So they obviously have a driver's license that they could use to register to vote. And I see nothing on the front of the picture of the ID that says what state they're from or what state their home is. So I don't understand the problem. If they have a driver's license and it's from Wyoming, that they would have a problem, you know, registering to vote.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that the requirements to achieve that UW ID, that they should have other forms of acceptable identification. But, you know, we also have to think about community colleges, how that could change, the fact that there's no non-citizen designation on there. None of this is codified. You know, it's a different situation. And so I agree with what you're saying.
Yes, Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, although it's not within your purview, I wonder if you're aware, are there other schools within Wyoming that are not state-run or governed community colleges or the University of Wyoming?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas, yes. Yes.
Follow up, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know, or have you heard, let's go into, yeah, anyway. Do you know if some of these other schools issue identification also?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas, I don't know for sure, but I'd be surprised if they don't.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Cheyenne High Schools do.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Through
the
the
way
chair,
it's
please.
worded.
Through the chair.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas. Yeah, and the way it's worded, you know, that becomes problematic.
Thank you.
Follow up? Nope. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Gray. I'm looking at this obtaining a Wyoming One card, and it says you can download your own picture, and that additional cards are, the first card is free, and you can replace it if it's damaged or stolen. So I'm saying that if you were intent on fraud, you could have an ID card that showed you and a picture ID of someone else. Is that, and it's not really, once you have that card, it wouldn't be, you would lose the security of the photo ID or the passport or the military ID. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Gray.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, could you repeat that? I'm not quite hitting what you're going for there.
Well, it says you can get a replacement ID card. You can upload your own picture. So if you had an original ID card that you obtained with your photo ID or passport or whatever, you could, if you were intent on fraud, you could ask for another card, have someone else's picture on it, and then pass through. You wouldn't have the same security that you would have if you had the original driver's license or passport or military ID. So I think it's, we want to be secure as possible, and I think that's a temptation, maybe, so.
Would you agree? Is that a question to Secretary Gray?
I hope I'm answering his question, that there's no security in additional cards.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think
Secretary Gray.
I think that gets to our overall point, that they aren't as rigorous. And so the policy question is whether we should allow them for purposes of voter ID.
And I have one. Representative Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, I know that sometimes photographers will come into school to take pictures at the beginning of the school year. A lot of those, particularly seniors are 18 years old. And then they give them a school ID card. Under the existing, would that be considered a legal photo ID?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, let me pull up the reference. I want to be 100% on this.
Mr. Chairman, I can read it to everybody.
Yeah, it's
Representative Yin.
photo identification. Okay.
You got it, Mr.
Yeah,
Secretary.
photo identification issued by the University of Wyoming, a Wyoming Community College, or a Wyoming public school. So yes, and when you think about them, the public school, I think security provisions are, also an issue there.
Follow up?
So in other words, we're saying that yes, that if Johnny Jones gets a photo ID from the school photographer, that would definitely, they would be able to vote with that.
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Webb, yes, under the voter ID law. And they're very easy to reproduce too. I mean, I think back to high school, I had, they came in on picture day and, I had, my photo on there and beaming. And I could have done that on, one of these printers now, that people buy. It was not that sophisticated, and it would be eligible for voter ID.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Secretary Gray, I had one. So just bottom line, obviously a student ID is meant for the university or meant for a community college. It is not an official ID when it comes to, say, purchasing liquor or anything like that, is it not?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that gets to our comments on TSA not accepting them is no.
Thank you. Any other questions?
The other thing too, Mr. Chairman, can I have one thing? Yeah.
Quickly.
You think about, I still have my student ID from high school. I was looking at it the other day. Could I use that for voter ID 20 years, 30 years later? I think under the statute right now I could. And so, I just think there's a lot of problems with this provision in state law.
Secretary Gray, I have other questions, but I'm not going to ask. No.
I found it.
Thank you. Any other agency? Any organization? Hear from the clerks. Welcome. If you can identify yourselves and have a comment.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. At the table with me this afternoon is the Honorable Julie Freeze, the Fremont County Clerk, and we're going to tag team a little bit on this topic. We've always kind of thought that a photo ID was a photo ID and that it required a lot of verification to obtain a photo ID, which is what we use for voter ID. Two things to distinguish here in this discussion is there's voter registration and for voter registration, and then there's photo ID to vote. Two things, okay? When the statute was made for voter ID, we insisted pretty much that we should use what Help America Vote Act allows for proofs of identification. So in the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, which is what regulates our WyoReg system, our voter registration system, student IDs are allowed there with a driver's license number or a social security number so that it will put it into the scan that goes in to see whether they have citizenship and residency. So a voter ID, student ID, if it's used for registration, has those two additional requirements to be able to do the full scan on them. Our concern, we did some recent search, like in the last week, once we saw this bill, we made a few phone calls to some of the institutions in the state. University of Wyoming, LCCC, Central Wyoming Community College, Job Corps, and the Catholic College, and asked what documents do they require and what combinations of documents they require to get a student ID. We found out that they require government-issued photo IDs, which would be driver's licenses, passports, state identification cards, or a military ID, birth certificates, social security numbers. And we thought, okay, that's pretty rigorous for a student ID. But then we also found out that in reality, a lot of student IDs now have a photo that's been taken by the institution, but then they're allowed to put any name on that photo. When I mean by any name, it can be a nickname, it can be a variation on their name, so like Robert or Bob. And so the combination with the photo doesn't have a proper name, which is what we would use to check through WildReg or to check the poll list. So without the proper name with the photo, we've got concerns about that. And we also are concerned that consistently across these institutions, and we just polled a few, they're not administering their student IDs uniformly, and there isn't the back end of those IDs that we thought that was there. And our concern again goes back to voter registration. We can use student IDs for voter registration, but you can't use a student ID for voting. But again, you have an additional thing when you do registration with a driver's license and a social security number to get that ability to scan the residency and citizenship. So with that, Mr. Chairman and committee, and Julie probably has a couple things to say, but we are concerned about student IDs because they're not consistently supported by the documents that they may have been before and that may have changed over time. And we're concerned as well because a proper name and the correct name is really important with that photo for them to be able to verify that their ability to be a voter.
So I just had a quick question. So when it's a matter of voter registration, you're almost just using a photo to make sure it's them in person, and then you're using an official document, whether it's Social Security or whether it's a driver's license, to finish that process?
Mr. Chairman, that's right. They have to back it up with a driver's license, basically, and remember, our driver's licenses in Wyoming are real IDs, so they have all of that support behind them. They've got the citizenship, they've got the residency, they have that information behind them. And also remember that, and this is kind of old polling that we did, but at one point we were trying to figure out how many people, what kinds of IDs people were using to register to vote. 90% of people in the state of Wyoming use a driver's license with a photo. About 85%, between 85 and 90% of that 90% is Wyoming driver's licenses, because we can also accept out-of-state driver's licenses, again, with the 4 social security numbers. So, but yeah.
Sorry, I slipped that question in there, committee. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself and any comments you may have?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Julie Freese, Fremont County Clerk. So the only thing I want to add to that is, again, to make it very clear that this bill is on ID to vote. So you're already in the system. You're not going to be checking citizenship. We've already done that. Okay, so we're just looking at a picture saying I am who I say I am. Do you have the same concerns of what we researched? Some of those colleges were Fremont County colleges. I do want to say, when I do voter registration drives, which sometimes I'm at the colleges, sometimes I see college students or whatever, my first question always is, and I think for a lot of us clerks, even talking to the Albany County clerk, her method might be changing after this last election. We talked about the fact that we always ask, do you own a valid Wyoming driver's license? That's your first question out of your mouth when you're registering to vote, because the very top of our card, if they're filling out a card anyway, there's, am I a felon, am I a US citizen, and I'm 18 years of age. And then the very next line after their name is, please put your Wyoming driver's license. If you do not have one, then it has to be the last 4 digits of your social security number. Then the ID comes into play when they've signed the oath and say, this is Julie Freese, and I look like that, and Julie Freese, and I've got some information here. So just remember, we're not talking about voter registration. That's going to stay, that the ID can be used because it's a HAVA thing, and that we can use that as that method with that driver, or the driver's license or the 4 digits. But we do a lot of asking about the driver's license first, just so you know, as a matter of practice. I just wanted you to know that. So.
Thank
Stand
you
for
very
questions.
much. Thank you for that explanation. Is there any questions from the committee? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to address you both on this, and I hope you don't mind. So you were saying that you check when you have a voter drive to see if they have a Wyoming driver's license. So because they do have a Wyoming driver's license, do you feel that it's important for them to be able to use a student ID to vote with? Because the student ID, again, I'll point out, doesn't say where they're from. And as Representative Johnson pointed out earlier, there is a possibility of faking one of these student IDs. Wouldn't it be better to insist that they use a Wyoming ID or a driver's license at least to register and to vote?
Thank you. Either one of you want to take that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. So again, in practice, and I'm going to talk about my practice. So on our list that are, when you're at the polls, on our list that shows to the voter, on the other side, we start with driver's license. So that kind of wanes down to the Medicare, Medicaid card at the bottom, and saying these are, so that maybe you look at it and go, oh, the first one I don't have, and go to the second one. So prior to today, we thought student IDs were allowed, and I thought they were rigorous, and it's been a little bit daunting, I guess, that we didn't realize that that wasn't consistent across the board. The only thing I'm going to tell you, and it's going to have to do with education in the future of making people get used to the fact that they're going to probably have to go get an ID card. But I've had a guy who ran for election, he's actually an elected official, ran for a different office, and like the last minute right before voting, he says, oh my gosh, I lost my driver's license, and he had nothing on the list. Nothing at all on the list. So I think about the fires and the people, I went through a fire myself, and I worry about those kind of things, and it's not easy to hurry and get an ID card. So I do worry about whittling way too far onto our list. But with that said, before I was okay with that. We're a little bit, the Clerks Association was surprised just that the names especially not having to be the legal name, which is how we have to put them in the WireReg system. So that was a little bit, I don't think we could compare. Let me give you an example. If somebody gave me one that said Bob Jones, that was real common, and I see that they've given me everything for a Robert, I would probably ask if they had any other ID. I probably wouldn't just take the student ID because that wouldn't match his legal description that I have in my computer.
Thank you. Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if this was enacted and it were to whittle down the number of IDs that you would have to look at, do you feel that this would be helpful and simplify things for you?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, again, I think a lot of people are using their driver's license. We do have in the state e-poll book system, we do have a way, because I can't get through the system unless I click what you gave to us. We were not able to get any kind of stats from the state on that when we got done with our e-poll books. That would be nice to know that. But I think most people are bringing us the driver's license. I think that's what we saw most of the time. So I think anytime you whittle away at a list, always worry about those people who lose something. But I think the education that we do in the Clerks Association to get that information out to people will just have to amp up.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clerks, thank you for being here. Julie or Mary Langford, do you have any stats on how many people, if any, use a Medicaid or Medicare card to shore up their identification?
And Mr. Chairman and Representative Weber, again, to say like the e-poll book system would have been great, but we don't get the stats. That is something for an enhancement for in the future. I don't recall a lot of people using that at my polls in Fremont County, but I don't have any stats for you. I apologize. I wish I did.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Clerk Freeze. I know you have one of the largest counties in the state, so that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Mary, did you have a comment to answer one of those
I just
questions?
have a short follow-up, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Weber. Again, this other polling that I did where I stated the 90%, at that point in time, because we were curious as well, the clerks were concerned. We wanted photo IDs, for voter registration, and Medicare, Medicaid cards do not have photos. And we were concerned about that at the get-go when we started requiring that. And I think we can pretty safely say it's not that many people. They have been pretty actively pursuing identification cards that are issued by YDOT, and they're free. And there have been some efforts that have been made. If you ever look when you get your driver's license renewal, there's a statement on there. It says if you're not going to renew your driver's license, make sure that you go get an ID. They're free. And that was one of the efforts that was made so that they wouldn't feel that they were having to buy an ID so that they could vote. But I think it's been fairly successful in that respect. Of course, there's always some holes, and those are the ones that we're concerned about, it gets a little harder, and, people that were in a fire or lost their driver's license at the last minute, those kinds of things. But Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's not a huge number.
Thank you, and I think that'll be another bill that kind of
Yep,
helps whittle things down, so. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Okay, any members of the public that are here in person to speak on this, and we're going to limit testimony, I'm sorry, for 2 minutes apiece. We do have another bill to get to, so. Please come up and identify yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Sophia Gomelski. I'm a student at the university. I'm a pre-law and honors student, and I'm finishing my degrees in political science and international studies. I'm here today because I'm passionate about our democracy, and I've dedicated myself to increasing student involvement and political participation. I came to the legislature here 3 years ago as a student page. I've completed the high school and college internship programs, and I've also worked as a legislative aide. So I've been here every year for the past 4 years. And in fact, Wyoming's small population provides us with a very unique level of access to our government, which is part of what I love most about this state. And the fact that I can come here after my voting and elections class and speak with you directly. Despite all of this, our state has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the entire country. And that is partly because of lack of interest, political efficacy, time, and access to information. This low participation rate only exacerbates the gap in youth political and civic engagement. It's hard enough to convince students to do just about anything, including voting. And denying the validity of school-issued IDs sends a mixed message about the value of civic engagement and participation in our democratic process. It undermines the role of schools and institutions as institutions that should create good citizens. The Albany County Clerk's office is in walking distance from our university, and if so, a student didn't drive there and forgot their driver's license, they may still have their student ID on them. This would allow them to still exercise their constitutional right to vote. I served as a poll worker at 16, and this past election was my first time voting. And I wanted to go in person on election day, and I insisted on that. I stood outside in line in the freezing cold for 2 hours past the poll close time just to cast my vote. That's because I love our democracy. But if I had for any reason forgotten my driver's license, honestly, I might have just given up there. As you can see from the handout in front of you, I hope, the student IDs at the university do in fact include all of the security features of a government-issued ID. And the explanation for that is very simple. One, our university is a government agency, so that's a government-issued ID. And two, you must show another form of government-issued ID, like your passport, which will surely indicate your status as a citizen in order to get a student ID. It's that simple. I helped organize and volunteer during the National Voter Registration Drive hosted by our university's Service Leadership and Community Engagement Office. I want to set the record straight and say that when I called the Secretary of State's office and asked about this event, we were assured that as long as we were not directly registering voters, which is only for the county clerk to do, that we were okay promoting student involvement. I didn't check IDs or citizenship status because it was unnecessary. That is the job reserved for our trusted county clerks. This bill undermines that. We should be making it more accessible for students to vote and make their voices heard. This bill is a step in the wrong direction. I told my voting and elections class about this bill before I left, and they genuinely thought I was kidding. Frankly, there's literally no good reason to pass this bill. It's trying to solve a non-existent problem while disenfranchising young voters. Please don't send that message to students in this state. Please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for staying so involved
Thank you.
in government. Any questions? Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Gamelski. We really appreciate your engagement. Do you know the standards that other schools in Wyoming have for issuing student IDs? I appreciate that the University of Wyoming does this, but we have other schools, and so do you know what their standards are?
So thank you so much for your question. When Mr. Chair and members of the committee, when I was in middle school, elementary school, even kindergarten, we weren't issued student IDs. To the best of my understanding, student IDs are something that you get either in high school or at the university level. In high school, my ID would have said my date of birth on it. And so when I would have taken that to the county clerk's office, if it had said that I was 16, they just wouldn't have allowed me to vote with that student ID. And I believe that it would be just about the same with any other school-issued ID, frankly. I think the county clerk has the discretion to say, no, I don't think that this is a valid ID because I don't know what requirements were put in place for you to get this and bring it to us.
All right, thank you. Next up.
Thank you so much, Chairman and committee. My name is Tanner Ewalt. You may have seen me running around the Capitol getting my steps in, but I'm not here today as an employee of any party. I'm here on my own. I am a recent and very proud graduate of the University of Wyoming. As a matter of fact, 41 days ago, I walked across the stage at our great institution and left with a degree in political science. We've talked a lot about how this more than likely would not affect people except those real edge cases. I was one of those edge cases the first time I went to vote here in the state of Wyoming. Born and raised, citizen my whole life. Forgot my ID, very last minute, running to the polls, kind of had forgotten that I needed to vote in the primary. If this law had been in place, I would have been disenfranchised from our political process, flatly. I've heard other concerns on this committee about the ease of replicability of these IDs in a fraudulent sense. First and foremost, I would say all of our IDs can be fraudulently reproduced if somebody has the intention to do that. The point of laws like this should be to make our election process more secure. But all I see this as doing is blocking more students like me, those edge cases, and even students who don't have driver's licenses or other forms of identification on them in that moment or that are valid in that moment due to expiration dates or something like that from the process. When I went to vote for the first time, both in the primary and in my first national election, I just signed an affidavit that I met all the requirements to vote. We have the tools in our tool case right now to solve this problem if it arises. If we find a case of somebody going through all the processes at the university that we've said to fraudulently vote in our election, that's still a crime. However, if we pass this law, it closes the door to more and more students to vote. I'd like to bring up the point that the previous speaker did, that we have a very low voter turnout, and we have a problem with youth leaving this state. I don't think that those two things are disconnected. I think the more involved and the more engaged students feel, young people feel, in our state, in every regard, educationally, politically, all of it, the more likely they are to feel invested here and to stay here. If you do this, I fear, and I know for some students, it will be another reason on their list why they need to leave. It will send the message, we don't want you to vote, we do not want you to be involved, and we do not want you to be invested in our state. I very, very strongly urge you to vote against this, to send the opposite message to our students, that we trust you at your word, that if you're going to vote in this election, you sign that affidavit in full faith and full honesty. And if not, again, they're lying, that is fraud. We have the tools to go after that. It is a crime. Thank you so much. I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Congratulations on your graduation, too. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Anybody else in the room from the public to testify? Okay, let's move online.
Mr. Chairman, we do have one participant online.
Okay. And is it, which person is that?
Mr. Chairman, Phyllis Roseberry.
Okay. Thank you. If you could let her in.
Phyllis, please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Phyllis. Please
Okay,
identify
thanks.
yourself and give your comments to the committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate providing opportunity for public comments. I think that's, of course, important in our democracy. I am from Worland, slowly moving to Lander. I'm chair of Wyoming Rising, which is a 501c4 nonprofit in Northwest Wyoming. One of our issues we work on is citizen participation in our democracy. And I really enjoyed listening to, I've learned a lot, actually, listening to everyone's comments. But I guess my concern is if the emphasis is on fear of fraud and non-residents voting in Wyoming, I think the record has shown over and over again that's not a problem. That's not happening, number one. So I would go along with the previous student whose name I should remember, that if that did occur, then that's a case that needs to be looked at and prosecuted, but doesn't mean we have to constrain the voting opportunities for all these people, students. So I would concur with Representative Yin. The emphasis to me should be on enfranchising. It's a precious right we have in this country to vote. And you as representatives in a representative democracy, to me, the emphasis should be on trying to facilitate citizens of all flavors, especially our young people who will be running our country soon, to participate in our democracy. So if there's a problem with the student ID, let's clean that up, not eliminate it. So that's my position. I'm opposed to this bill. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for participating. And is there any questions from the committee? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for zooming in and participating. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Any other people online? That was it?
Mr. Chairman, that was it, yes.
At this time, I will close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Steve, did you? Okay. Representative Johnson, move the bill. Representative Webb, second. Are there any amendments to the bill? It's a pretty short, sweet one. All right. No amendments? All right. Seeing none, we have before us House Bill 81. Oh, no, that's the wrong bill. Sorry. I was already ready on the next one. Voter revision. Okay, House Bill 160, voter identification revisions. Will you please pull the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call vote on House Bill 160, voter identification revisions. Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Locke?
Aye.
Representative Heft? Representative Johnson?
Aye.
Representative Lucas?
Aye.
Representative Webb?
Aye.
Representative Weber?
Aye.
Representative Yin?
Nope.
Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 8 ayes, 1 no.
Thank you. House Bill 160, voter identification revisions, has passed the committee. Congratulations, Representative Tarver.
Shouldn't you have looked to the right?
If there's any other bills you want us to present for you today? All right, next up is House Bill 81. This will be regulatory reduction mortgage loan originator licensing. Minority Leader Yin will present.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I bring before you House Bill 81, regulatory reduction mortgage loan originator licensing. So members, this came to me from a constituent, actually. So we have a housing problem in Teton County. I think many of you are well aware, as well as, throughout the state. And so this was an idea that came from a constituent that thought that there is a way for us to have one more tool in the toolbox to alleviate housing issues. The intent from that constituent and from the bill is to allow for a specific number of loans from non-licensed lenders to provide those mortgages to their to folks. So the constituent asking was actually a nonprofit employer in town, and they wanted more stability for their employees because their employees are renters. They wanted them to own a home. One of the things that they knew that they could do was if their employee's credit score wasn't great enough for a regular mortgage, they could offer a mortgage to their employees and help them get into a house permanently and be an actual homeowner in the state of Wyoming. And so that's the goal of the bill. The reason you have this proposed amendment before you is because when drafting this with LSO, I kind of made the mistake of putting it in the wrong section. So the mortgage lender laws are actually pretty complicated, which is the whole reason for the bill anyways. But there's a mortgage loan originator and there's also the mortgage lender. So the mortgage loan originator is an actual person with the license, like a natural person, a human being with the license. The mortgage lender is the entity that actually hands out the mortgage. So we're talking, they're the ones that are behind the agreement. So we're talking about a business, right, instead of an actual person. So the exception gets moved from the originator, which is a human being, to the exemption for license requirements for the lender, which is an entity. So that way, the actual employer has the exception rather than the originator. So with the employer having the exception, you no longer need the originator anyway. So there's no reason for having the originator exception at all. So all the amendment does is just move it from that originator part to the lender part. And happy to answer any questions, both on the bill and the amendment.
Questions from the committee, Vice Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and someday I'll get that button right. And thank you, Minority Leader Yin. So quickly, so the issue, I'm just making sure I understand it. So in this case, you've changed it, and the change, and I'm going to kind of merge this together a little bit, but you've changed to kind of to move to the entity that's doing the loan is what we're doing here. But in short, in this case, and you drafted a good case, the entity is giving loans and they're not licensed. So that's the fundamental issue. And if you don't mind me merging kind of a second question in there, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
does this in any way impact a case where someone's going to owner finance? I'm not sure I can connect the dots, but I'm just thought maybe you had thought that through and I didn't know if somebody else had. So, for example, I buy something and then I decide to sell it owner financed. In those cases, I'm not licensed. I don't think this impacts that case at all, but I would be curious to hear what you thought on that.
Minority Leader Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Representative Locke. So there are a couple of exceptions that are in this exceptions from license requirements list. And I'm trying to remember if that is one of them. But regardless, I mean, even if they weren't accepted, they would still be allowed under this one, right? Because it basically allows anyone, as long as you're only doing up to 5 in any 1 year. If owner financed is already accepted, this doesn't touch that. This is providing a new exception. It's not meant to interfere with any other styles of financing.
Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Minority Leader Yin. This is very interesting. I was a mortgage lender for a long time. So I guess I'm curious on the part of the lender, do they receive any training? Do they have any training? There are a lot of laws that affect mortgage lending and lending in general that don't apply to the national mortgage licensing. I forgot what S is for, but other laws that are very important, fair lending, equal housing and so on. And so I'm just curious if they get any training of any kind.
Minority Leader Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a very good question. With the exception, they are pretty much exempt from all of that. I think that it is still important, and I suspect that these employers will still consult a lawyer because it's going to be a contract for lots of money, right? So they want to make sure it's ironclad, and so I'm sure that they will still commit to fair lending practices, and which is the whole point for mortgage licensing anyways, is to protect the consumer. But this allows for a little bit of a berth to allow folks to help people like their employers or friends and family.
Follow up? Any other questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman Knapp and Minority Leader Yen. What is going to protect, I mean, you said that there was some protection for consumers. I see that there could be a door open for loan sharking, and I mean, what, is it buyer beware? I mean, if they're not regulated? Thank you.
Minority Leader Yin.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I mean, that is certainly possible, right? So we're saying that they allow those loans. But the idea would be that the one protection there is actually in the exception. So if you look, it says without compensation or gain. So that's the real consumer protection, to not allow just anybody to do it, right? You have to be doing it for a reason that isn't to make money specifically from that loan.
Yes, follow up.
It also says exclude any interest paid under the loan. I mean, that's, so I think that still leaves it open.
Minority Leader.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, you're correct that you could offer a loan with an exorbitant interest rate and that would still be allowed within this exception. But that would be pretty clear to the consumer that it is a very high interest loan. So you don't have any like hidden fee that is going to the lender for a loan shark. But yes, if someone wanted to start handing out up to 5, right? Like they could only do it for 5 mortgages, there is that risk. And that's the same with anything where we create exemptions from regulations, right? So there is a risk inherent to it, but the idea would be that the good provided would be worth the shovel.
Follow up.
Well, I appreciate your work on this bill. Looks like a great bill, and I would like to offer an amendment. Maybe we get together and offer something to clean that up. I think it'd be a great boon to the state of Wyoming. I think I would like to clear that up a little bit.
Minority Leader Yin.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, happy to work with you on it.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Any agency? Welcome, good to see you. Could you go ahead and state your names for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Bishop. I am the State Banking Commissioner, and we are the agency that enforces the Mortgage Act, and we license and regulate mortgage companies and mortgage loan originators in this state. With me is Yvonne Schaefer-Shaw. She's our Deputy Commissioner over this area. I will apologize if we did prepare for the original language, which was mortgage loan originators, which is a very different concept than mortgage companies. There are very different requirements to get those licenses, and the exemptions are quite a bit different. Thank you, Representative Yen. So we are going to kind of do this on the fly, so we apologize for that, but we'll try to answer any questions you may have. So I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Shaw to kick things off.
All right, thank you.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Yvonne Schaefer-Shaw. So with this pertaining to now sorry, I'm all flustered now. The companies, the non-depository institutions of mortgage loan origination companies, this, since it's not for compensation or gain, it still could be a potential violation within the SAFE Act, which is the portion of the federal regulation where it is instituted under the Consumer Protection Federal Bureau. I'm sorry if I'm not doing it right. We do feel that ideally with any type of mortgage, usually the mortgage company is responsible for the end all and making sure that they are compliant within the state law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So mortgage lending is very complicated. The laws in this state and federal law interact with each other a little bit differently than most areas of law. So our Mortgage Act models the SAFE Act and federal laws and regulations for mortgage lending. And at least for mortgage loan originators, we'll have to double check and see if this is the case for mortgage companies. I imagine it is. If our law is not compliant with federal SAFE Act laws, the CFPB preempts us, comes in, and regulates those entities and mortgage loan originators according to federal law. Since currently our law is compliant with the SAFE Act, the state in our office, through our office, enforces this act. Now, we'll have to take this amendment and do some research and see if this would make our law non-compliant with federal law and basically passing this off from the state enforcing this to the federal government, to the CFPB enforcing this. That could be a potential ramification of this. If this goes through, we'll have to do some research. We do know if this was the mortgage loan originator, I think it would definitely make it non-compliant with the SAFE Act, so the CFPB would come in and override us in that case. We'll do some research and see if that's the case for the mortgage companies, but I will say the standard for mortgage companies getting a license is significantly higher than the mortgage loan originators that we did research on. You have to do quite a few background checks on the mortgage company, and that's who we examine. So I think even if it's allowed to exempt a mortgage company from being licensed with our office, we still do need to know who those companies are, because if there's any violation, they still need to comply with federal law. If there's any consumer harm or any consumer complaint to our office, we still need to be able to examine those companies to make sure that there's no consumer harm being done. Whereas we usually do that through licensing those companies. We know who they are, and we are on a regular examination cycle to make sure they're compliant and protecting consumers. As long as we'll stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from committee? Yes, Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, did we vote on this amendment?
We haven't, and actually, we're still in testimony. And before we go into any amendments or anything, I'm going to ask Minority Leader Yin if
Thank
if you would like to wait for that extra investigation and possibly go to next meeting, but we'll finish with public testimony. And then when we get to that point, I'll ask you. But any other questions? Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bishop, Ms. Shaw, do you know, do all mortgage lenders, are they all required to comply with the SAFE Act?
Ms. Schaefer-Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, they are. As long as they're doing those loan origination transactions for compensation, yes, they do have to be licensed.
Follow up?
And if they are not compensated?
Ms. Schaefer-Shaw.
Most of the, ideally, from my understanding, they are all compensated. And so it's been my understanding that they're all licensed.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that comes into the definition within in our law. For it to be mortgage lending activity, that definition within the law means for compensation, either directly or indirectly. So for it to be even considered mortgage lending activity, compensation is involved.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Any follow-up to that? Representative Lucas?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are we considering repayment as compensation? Or I guess, we've got a nonprofit with non-paid people doing this. I guess I'm a little confused. Thank you.
Mr. Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas. That's where the tricky part of this is what is compensation? It's a nonprofit. However, if somebody's getting a paycheck to do this activity, then they are being compensated and it is mortgage lending activity, even though if somebody at all is getting paid for anything. Now, it's not repayment of the loan. It's if the company is receiving any type of payment for this activity, it is compensation.
Follow up? Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we're done with these guys' testimony. We'll still take public. All right. Anyone in the audience here to comment on this bill? Don't pan out. Don't pan out. All right, we'll take comments from online, please. Is there anybody waiting online for this particular bill?
Mr. Chairman, there are not.
Okay. There are not. You know what? I'm going to ask now because I'll treat, if the agency does come back, as public comment, so we're not going to close it. Minority Leader Yin, do you want to wait for that investigation into whether it complies with that act or not?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to carry over until Monday. I think
Okay.
I don't want this to be a surprise on the agency. I think it's important for them to do.
Sounds
do their
good.
work.
Is Monday enough time for you? Okay. So we will carry this bill over till Monday. Yes. Is there any other business to come before the board or before the committee? I'm sorry. No? All right, we will adjourn.